Hi, I'm Sarah. I used to be the problem child that my parents threw out when I got pregnant, but they had no idea I was carrying the twins of billionaire Marcus Wellington. 9 months later, they were on their knees begging for forgiveness. You know that feeling when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally just don't? When they choose to believe strangers over their own daughter? That's exactly what happened to me on March 15th, 2023. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing about how it all played out. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where your own family trusted outsiders more than they trusted you? Because if you have, then you'll understand exactly what I went through. It was a Tuesday evening, and I remember it so clearly because Tuesdays were always family dinner night at the Morrison household. Mom would make her famous meatloaf. Dad would complain about work, and my younger sister Emma would update us on whatever drama was happening at her college. It was supposed to be our sacred time together. No phones, no distractions, just family. But that particular Tuesday, something was different. The moment I walked through the front door, I could feel the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. Mom barely looked at me when I said hello, and Dad's usual warm smile was nowhere to be found. Emma was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone with this smug expression that I'd learned to recognize over the years. "Sarah," Mom said, her voice ice cold as she sliced the meatloaf with more force than necessary. "We need to talk." I set my medical textbooks down on the counter. I was in my final year of medical school, working my ass off to make them proud, and tried to read the room. Something was seriously wrong. "Okay," I said carefully. "What's going on?" That's when Emma looked up from her phone, and I saw it. That look. The same look she'd given me when we were kids, and she was about to tell Mom that I'd broken her favorite vase. Except we weren't kids anymore. I was 22 years old. She was 20. And whatever she was about to say was going to change everything. "I heard some interesting things about you today, Sarah," Emma said, practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. "Want to tell Mom and Dad, or should I?" My stomach dropped. I had no idea what she was talking about, but the way she was looking at me made my skin crawl. "Emma, I don't know what you think you heard, but she's pregnant," Emma announced, cutting me off. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been detonated. "Sarah's pregnant, and she's been hiding it from us for months." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's knife clattered to the cutting board, and Dad's fork froze halfway to his mouth. I felt like the floor had just opened up beneath me and I was falling through space. That's not," I stammered, but then I realized something that made my blood run cold. Emma wasn't wrong. I was pregnant. I was 3 months pregnant with twins, and I hadn't told anyone yet because I was still figuring out how to break the news to Marcus. We'd been keeping our relationship private for so many reasons, and now— "So it's true," Mom whispered, her face going pale. "My daughter is pregnant, and I had to hear it from the campus gossip mill instead of from her own mouth." "Mom, let me explain." "Explain what?" Dad's voice was quiet, but there was a dangerous edge to it that I'd never heard before. "Explain how you've been lying to us for months. Explain how you've been sneaking around behind our backs." "I wasn't sneaking around," I said, my voice getting stronger. "I was being careful. This is complicated, and I wanted to handle it the right way." "Complicated?" Emma laughed, a harsh sound that made me flinch. "What's complicated about getting knocked up by some random guy? Unless—" Her eyes widened with fake surprise. "Please don't tell me you don't even know who the father is." "Of course I know who the father is," I snapped, finally finding my voice. "His name is Marcus Wellington and—" "Wellington?" Dad interrupted, setting down his fork with a sharp clink. "As in the Wellington Industries? Sarah, are you seriously going to sit there and lie to our faces right now?" "I'm not lying," I protested, but I could see in their eyes that they'd already made up their minds. "Marcus Wellington is the father of my babies. We've been together for 8 months and—" "8 months?" Mom's voice was shrill now, rising with each word. "You've been seeing some man for 8 months and you never thought to mention it? Not once?" "Because I knew you'd react like this." I gestured wildly at their shocked faces. "Because I knew you wouldn't understand." "Oh, we understand perfectly," Dad said, standing up from his chair. "We understand that our daughter has turned into someone we don't recognize, someone who lies and makes up ridiculous stories when she gets caught." "Marcus Wellington," Emma repeated, shaking her head. "Do you hear yourself, Sarah? You seriously expect us to believe that you're dating a billionaire? That Marcus Wellington, who's on the cover of Forbes magazine, is the father of your babies?" "Yes!" I shouted, tears starting to blur my vision. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you." But I could see it in their faces. They thought I was delusional. They thought I was making up some fantasy to avoid admitting that I'd gotten pregnant by some nobody. The three people who were supposed to know me better than anyone in the world had already decided that I was a liar. "Sarah," Mom said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when she thought I was being childish. "Sweetie, I know this is scary. Getting pregnant when you're not ready is terrifying, but making up stories isn't going to make this situation any better." "I'm not making up stories," I screamed, my voice cracking. "Why won't you believe me?" "Because it's impossible," Dad exploded, his calm facade finally cracking. "Because billionaires don't date broke medical students. Because if you were really dating Marcus Wellington, we would have known about it." "Would you?" I challenged. "Would you really? Because when's the last time any of you asked me about my personal life? When's the last time you showed any interest in what I was doing when I wasn't here studying?" The silence that followed was telling, because the truth was, they hadn't. They'd been so focused on my grades, on my future career, on making sure I was living up to their expectations, that they'd never bothered to ask if I was happy, if I was lonely, if I'd found someone who made me feel like the most important person in the world. "This is unbelievable," Emma muttered, shaking her head. "Even now, even caught red-handed, she's still lying." "I'm not lying," I whispered, but my voice was so quiet I wasn't sure they heard me. "Yes, you are," Mom said firmly. "And frankly, Sarah, I'm disappointed. I raised you better than this. I raised you to be honest, to be responsible, to think about how your actions affect this family." "My actions?" I laughed bitterly. "What about your actions? What about the fact that you're choosing to believe I'm a liar instead of listening to what I'm trying to tell you? Because what you're telling us is ridiculous," Dad shouted. "You want us to believe that you've been secretly dating one of the most powerful men in the country? You want us to believe that he got you pregnant and just, what, disappeared? Because I don't see any billionaire boyfriend here defending you." "He's in Europe on business," I said desperately. "He's been gone for 6 weeks, and I haven't been able to reach him because—" "Convenient," Emma interrupted with a snort. "Very convenient." I felt something break inside me then. Some last thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, they would choose to believe me, choose to trust me, choose to love me enough to give me the benefit of the doubt. But they didn't. They couldn't. And in that moment, I realized that the family I'd been trying so hard to make proud didn't really know me at all. "You know what?" I said, standing up from the table with as much dignity as I could muster. "Forget it. Forget I said anything." "Oh, no," Mom said, crossing her arms. You don't get to drop a bombshell like this and then just walk away. We need to figure out what we're going to do about this situation." "We?" I repeated. "There is no we in this situation. This is my life, my pregnancy, my decision." "Not when you're living under our roof," Dad said coldly. "Not when you're using our money for medical school. Not when your actions reflect on this entire family." "Fine," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "Then maybe I shouldn't be living under your roof anymore." The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment I thought maybe they would take them back. Maybe they would realize they'd gone too far. Maybe they would remember that I was their daughter, and that daughters make mistakes, and that love is supposed to be unconditional. But Dad just nodded slowly. "Maybe you shouldn't," Mom gasped. "David, you don't mean—" "Yes, I do," he said, not taking his eyes off me. "If Sarah wants to make adult decisions, then she can live with adult consequences. If she wants to get pregnant and lie about it and disrespect this family, then she can figure out how to take care of herself. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, waiting for Mom to intervene, waiting for Emma to say something, anything to defend me. But Emma just sat there with her arms crossed, looking satisfied. Mom was crying quietly, but she wasn't saying anything. And Dad looked like he'd already made his decision. "Fine," I whispered. "I'll pack my things." "You have 24 hours, Dad said. And Sarah, don't come back until you're ready to tell us the truth." I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom on shaking legs, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. 24 hours. They were giving me 24 hours to pack up my entire life and disappear. As I pulled my suitcases out of the closet, my hand instinctively went to the necklace I was wearing. It was a simple chain with a small diamond pendant, nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention. But it was worth more than my parents' house, their cars, and probably their entire retirement fund combined. Marcus had given it to me 3 months ago, on the night he first told me he loved me. We'd been walking through Central Park after dinner at Le Bernardin, and he'd stopped under one of the old oak trees and pulled out this small velvet box. "It's not an engagement ring," he'd said quickly, seeing the look of surprise on my face. "I know we're not ready for that yet. But I wanted you to have something that would remind you that you're mine, that no matter what happens, no matter how complicated things get, I love you." The diamond had caught the light from the street lamps, throwing tiny rainbows across my palm. "Marcus, I can't accept this. It's too expensive to—" "It's not to anything," he'd interrupted, taking the necklace from the box and fastening it around my neck. "It's perfect, just like you." Now, as I folded clothes into my suitcase with tears streaming down my face, that necklace felt like the only real thing in my world. The only proof that the last 8 months hadn't been some elaborate dream. Because the truth was, I understood why my family didn't believe me. Marcus Wellington and I didn't make sense on paper. He was 30 years old, worth about $3 billion, and ran one of the most successful tech companies in the world. I was a broke medical student who lived with her parents and had never been anywhere more exotic than Myrtle Beach. But love doesn't care about paper. Love doesn't care about logic or practicality or what makes sense to other people. Love just is. I'd met Marcus at a charity gala that I'd only been able to attend because my anatomy professor had gotten sick and asked me to present her research on behalf of the university. I'd been terrified, standing up there in my borrowed dress and payless shoes, talking to a room full of people who probably spent more on lunch than I spent on rent. But afterward, this incredibly handsome man had approached me and said, "That was fascinating. I've never thought about the intersection of technology and medical research from that perspective before." We'd talked for 2 hours about medicine, about technology, about our dreams and fears and the things that kept us up at night. He never mentioned who he was, and I didn't recognize him from the magazines. To me, he was just Marcus, this brilliant, funny, incredibly kind man who looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. It wasn't until our 3rd date that I found out who he really was, and by then it was too late. I was already falling in love with him. Not with his money or his status or his power, but with the man who brought me coffee every morning during exam week. The man who listened to me vent about my family's expectations and never once made me feel like my problems were trivial. The man who made me laugh until my sides hurt and held me when I cried. But how do you explain that to people who have already decided you're a liar? How do you make them understand that sometimes fairy tales do come true, even for ordinary girls from ordinary families? You don't. You pack your bags and you leave, and you hope that someday they'll realize they were wrong. As I zipped up my last suitcase, I heard Emma's voice drifting up from the kitchen. She was on the phone with someone, probably one of her friends, and I could hear her laughing. "I know, right? She actually tried to tell us she was dating Marcus Wellington." Like, seriously? Does she think we're stupid? I mean, I know she's always been dramatic, but this is next level. I closed my bedroom door softly and sat down on my bed, running my hands over the comforter that Mom had bought me for my 16th birthday. This had been my safe space for so many years, the place I came to study, to cry, to dream about my future, and now I was leaving it behind, along with the people I thought would always love me no matter what. My phone buzzed, and for a moment my heart leaped, thinking it might be Marcus, but it was just a notification from my bank app reminding me that my account balance was dangerously low. I had exactly $347 to my name, no job, and nowhere to go. But I also had something my family didn't know about, something that would change everything once Marcus came back from his business trip and found out what had happened. I was carrying his children, twin boys, according to the ultrasound I'd gotten the week before. And when Marcus Wellington found out that his sons had been rejected by their mother's family, when he found out that the woman he loved had been thrown out of her home while pregnant with his heirs, well, let's just say my parents had no idea what was coming for them. I touched my necklace one more time, feeling the diamond's smooth surface against my skin. They thought I was lying. They thought I was delusional. They thought they knew better than I did about my own life. But in a few months, when the truth finally came out, they were going to realize just how wrong they'd been. And by then, it would be too late for apologies. The girl they were throwing out tonight wasn't going to be the same person who came back into their lives. That girl was going to be Sarah Wellington, wife of one of the most powerful men in the world, mother of his children, and someone who had learned the hard way that blood doesn't always mean family. I pulled my suitcases downstairs, my footsteps echoing in the hallway that had heard my first words, my first steps, my first heartbreak. Mom was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Sarah," she whispered, "please, just tell us the truth. We can work through this together, but you have to be honest with us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment I wavered. This was my mother, the woman who had raised me, who had bandaged my scraped knees and helped me with homework and taught me how to drive. Maybe I could try one more time. Maybe I could make her understand. "Mom," I said quietly, "I am telling you the truth. Marcus Wellington is the father of my babies. I love him and he loves me, and when he gets back from Europe, we're going to figure out how to build a life together." But even as I said the words, I could see in her eyes that she still didn't believe me. She thought I was sick, delusional, making up fantasies to cope with an unplanned pregnancy. "Oh, honey," she said, reaching out to touch my face. "We're going to get you help. We're going to find you someone to talk to, someone who can help you work through whatever's going on in your head." I stepped back from her touch, and I saw her flinch. "There's nothing going on in my head, Mom. There's just a daughter who needed her family to believe in her, and they chose not to." I walked toward the front door, dragging my suitcases behind me. Dad was standing in the doorway to the living room, his arms crossed, his face set in stone. "This is your choice, Sarah," he said. "Remember that. This is what you chose." I stopped and looked back at him. "No, Dad, this is what you chose. You chose to believe that your daughter was a liar instead of listening to what she was trying to tell you. You chose your pride over your family. Don't you dare try to put this on me." And with that, I walked out the front door and into the night, leaving behind everything I'd ever known. I had no idea where I was going to sleep, how I was going to eat, or what I was going to do about medical school. But I knew one thing for certain. Someday, they were going to realize their mistake. Someday, they were going to understand that they had thrown away the most important relationship in their lives over their own stubborn refusal to believe in something that seemed too good to be true. And when that day came, when they were standing on my doorstep begging for forgiveness, I would remember this moment. I would remember the way they looked at me like I was crazy, like I was someone they didn't even recognize, because the truth has a funny way of coming out eventually, and the truth was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The first week after leaving home was the hardest week of my life. I ended up staying at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where you pay by the week and try not to look too closely at the stains on the carpet. My $3 for $47 didn't stretch very far, and I was rationing instant noodles like they were gold. Every morning I would wake up with morning sickness so severe that I could barely keep water down, let alone food. The twins were growing and my body was changing rapidly, but I had no prenatal care, no support system, and no idea how I was going to survive the next 7 months. I tried calling Marcus every day, but his phone went straight to voicemail. His assistant told me he was in meetings around the clock, dealing with some major acquisition that required his full attention. I left message after message, explaining what had happened, begging him to call me back. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to wonder if maybe my parents were right. Maybe I had imagined the whole relationship. Maybe Marcus Wellington had just been playing with me. But then I would touch my necklace, feel the weight of that diamond against my skin, and I would remember. I would remember the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, the way he held my hand during movies, the way he whispered, "I love you," into my hair when he thought I was asleep. 3 weeks into my exile, I was sitting in the motel lobby trying to steal Wi-Fi to apply for jobs when I overheard the desk clerk talking to another guest. "Yeah, some rich guy's been calling here every day looking for a Sarah Morrison," the clerk was saying. "Sounds foreign or something. Keep saying it's urgent." My heart stopped. I rushed to the front desk, interrupting their conversation. "Did you say someone was calling for Sarah Morrison? That's me. I'm Sarah Morrison." The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a nameplate that read Dolores, looked me up and down skeptically. "You sure about that, honey? This guy sounded pretty important, had one of those fancy accents." "Please," I begged. "What did he say exactly?" Dolores shrugged and pulled out a sticky note covered in her handwriting. "Said his name was Marcus something. Left a number and said it was urgent that Sarah Morrison call him immediately. Said something about coming back from London early." I grabbed the sticky note with shaking hands. It was Marcus's private number, the one only I was supposed to have. He was back. He was looking for me. I ran back to my room and dialed with trembling fingers. The phone rang once, twice, and then... "Sarah?" His voice was rough, like he'd been awake for days. "Sarah? Is that you?" I burst into tears. 3 weeks of fear and loneliness and desperation came pouring out of me all at once. "Marcus, I've been trying to reach you. I know. I got your messages. All 37 of them." I could hear him moving around, probably pacing like he did when he was stressed. "Where are you? I went to your parents' house and they told me you'd moved out, but they wouldn't say where you'd gone." "They threw me out," I said through my tears. "They didn't believe me when I told them about us, about the babies. They said I was lying, that I was delusional." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "They threw you out? While you're pregnant? With my children? I've been staying at this motel and I don't have any money left, and I can't keep food down, and I'm scared, Marcus. I'm so scared." "Give me the address," he said. "Give me the address right now. I'm coming to get you." 45 minutes later, I heard a commotion outside my window. Car doors slamming, voices talking rapidly, footsteps on the metal stairs. I opened the door to find Marcus standing there in an expensive suit that was completely wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his eyes wild with worry. Behind him were 3 men in dark suits who I recognized as his security team, and a woman in scrubs carrying a medical bag. "Oh, God," Marcus breathed, taking in my appearance. I knew I looked terrible. I'd lost weight despite being pregnant, my clothes were hanging off me, and I had dark circles under my eyes from weeks of barely sleeping. He pulled me into his arms so gently, like he was afraid I might break. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I should have been here." "You didn't know," I said, breathing in his familiar cologne and feeling safe for the first time in weeks. "I should have known," he said fiercely. "I should have felt it somehow. You're carrying my children, and you've been suffering alone, and I was halfway around the world arguing about stock options." He pulled back to look at me, his hands framing my face. "Are you okay? Are the babies okay?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't seen a doctor since the night I left home." That's when the woman in scrubs stepped forward. "Mr. Wellington asked me to come check on you," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Catherine Wong, and I specialize in high-risk pregnancies." Within an hour, Dr. Wong had given me a complete examination in my dingy motel room, somehow managing to make the space feel clinical and safe. The twins were fine, she assured me, though I was dehydrated and undernourished. She gave me a prescription for prenatal vitamins and anti-nausea medication and scheduled me for a proper appointment at her private practice the following week. "Now," Marcus said once Dr. Wong had left, "we're getting you out of here." "Where are we going?" "Home," he said simply. "We're going home." Marcus had a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side that I'd only been to a handful of times. It was the kind of place you saw in movies, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Central Park, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, original artwork on the walls. But that night, it felt like a sanctuary. He ran me a bath in his enormous marble tub, brought me soup that his housekeeper had made, and held me while I cried about everything that had happened. And then, once I was clean and fed and wrapped in one of his cashmere robes, he got down on one knee beside the bed. "I was going to wait," he said, pulling out a ring box that made my necklace look like costume jewelry. "I was going to plan something elaborate and romantic. But after almost losing you, after thinking about what could have happened to you and our children while I was gone, I can't wait another day." The ring was breathtaking, a flawless solitaire diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured stars. But it wasn't the ring that made me cry. It was the look in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice when he said, "Sarah Morrison, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone or scared or unloved ever again?" "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." We were married 3 days later in a small ceremony at his family's estate in the Hamptons. It wasn't the wedding I'd dreamed about as a little girl. There were no bridesmaids, no big white dress, no family photos. Just me, Marcus, his parents, who welcomed me with more warmth than my own family had ever shown, and a handful of close friends. But it was perfect, because when Marcus slipped that ring onto my finger and promised to love and protect me for the rest of our lives, I finally understood what home was supposed to feel like. Over the next few months, as my belly grew and the twins became more active, Marcus and I settled into married life. He hired Dr. Wong as my private physician, enrolled me in the best childbirth classes money could buy, and transformed one of his guest bedrooms into a nursery that looked like something out of a fairy tale. I tried to go back to medical school, but the stress of the pregnancy combined with everything that had happened made it impossible to focus. Marcus suggested I take a leave of absence, and while part of me felt like I was giving up on my dreams, I knew it was the right decision. There would be time for medical school later. Right now, I needed to focus on my health and my babies. My family, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. I'd sent them a text message the day after Marcus proposed, letting them know that I was safe and that everything I'd told them was true. I included a photo of the engagement ring and Marcus's full name, thinking that maybe if they Googled him, they would realize their mistake. But I heard nothing back. No apology, no congratulations, no acknowledgement that they'd been wrong. It was like I'd simply ceased to exist in their world. That silence became even more deafening when Alexander and Victoria were born on a snowy February morning. Dr. Wong delivered them at Mount Sinai in a private suite that Marcus had reserved months in advance. They were perfect, tiny and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful, with Marcus's dark hair and what I hoped would be my green eyes. Marcus cried when he held them for the first time. This incredibly powerful, successful man who commanded billion-dollar companies and negotiated with world leaders was reduced to tears by 2 6-pound babies. "They're perfect," he kept saying. "They're absolutely perfect." I sent my parents a photo that first day. Just one picture of me holding the twins in the hospital with a simple message: "Alexander and Victoria Wellington, your grandchildren." Still nothing. Meanwhile, word was starting to get out about Marcus's marriage and new family. His PR team had managed to keep things quiet during my pregnancy, but now that the babies were here, It was getting harder to maintain our privacy. There were paparazzi photos of us leaving the hospital, society page mentions of the mysterious Mrs. Wellington, and speculation about where I'd come from and how I'd managed to catch one of New York's most eligible bachelors. Marcus shielded me from most of it, but I couldn't help seeing some of the articles. The general consensus seemed to be that I was either a gold digger who'd trapped him with a pregnancy, or some kind of social climber who'd somehow convinced him to marry beneath his station. It hurt, but not as much as my family's continued silence. Every milestone, the twins' first smiles, their first time sleeping through the night, their first solid foods, I wanted to share with my parents. I wanted to call my mom and ask for advice about diaper rashes and feeding schedules. I wanted my dad to meet his grandsons and see that they had his chin. But as the months passed, it became clear that wasn't going to happen. My family had made their choice, and they were sticking to it. That's when fate decided to intervene in the most brutal way possible. It was a Tuesday morning in September, almost exactly a year since the night they'd thrown me out, when Marcus's assistant called with urgent news. There had been a fire at my father's office building. Not a small fire, but a massive blaze that had destroyed the entire structure and several surrounding businesses. Dad's accounting firm was gone, along with all their files, computers, and client records. The insurance, it turned out, wouldn't cover the full extent of the damages. There were issues with the policy, questions about electrical code violations, lawsuits from other affected businesses. Within weeks, my parents went from being comfortably middle class to facing complete financial ruin. Then my mother was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. I found out about both crises from my grandmother, my dad's mother, who had been the only family member to reach out after the twins were born. She called me in tears, explaining that Mom needed surgery and chemotherapy, but they couldn't afford it. Their insurance had lapsed when Dad's business went under, and they were facing medical bills in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. "They're too proud to ask for help," Grandma Morrison whispered into the phone. "But Sarah, honey, if they don't get the money for your mother's treatment—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew what she was saying. "What about Emma?" I asked. "Surely she can help," Grandma sighed. "Emma's student loans are crushing her. She can barely afford rent, let alone medical bills. And besides, your parents, they still won't admit they were wrong about you. They're telling people that you must have trapped some rich man, that none of this is real. Even facing bankruptcy and my mother's potential death, they couldn't admit they'd made a mistake. But I could. I could be the bigger person. I could save my mother's life, even if she'd thrown me away when I needed her most." That night, I sat Marcus down and explained the situation. I was prepared to argue, to convince him that helping my family was the right thing to do, despite how they'd treated me. But he didn't hesitate for even a second. "Of course we'll help," he said. "They're your family, which means they're my family now too. And more importantly, they're Alexander and Victoria's grandparents. They might not even accept help from us," I warned him. Marcus's smile was sharp, predatory. "Oh, they'll accept it, because I'm not going to give them a choice." The next morning, Marcus's lawyers contacted my parents with an offer. The Wellington Foundation, a charitable organization that Marcus had established years earlier, would cover all of my mother's medical expenses. They would also provide a substantial family crisis fund to help them get back on their feet financially. There was just one condition. They had to publicly acknowledge that I was, in fact, married to Marcus Wellington and that Alexander and Victoria were their legitimate grandchildren. The lawyers presented them with newspaper clippings, hospital records, marriage certificates, and birth certificates. They provided a timeline of my relationship with Marcus, complete with dated photographs and witness statements. They made it impossible to deny the truth any longer, and then they waited. It took 3 days. 3 days of my mother getting sicker while my father's pride warred with his desperation. 3 days of watching their world crumble while the solution sat right in front of them, requiring only that they admit they'd been wrong. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon that I'll never forget, my phone rang. "Sarah?" It was my father's voice, but he sounded like he'd aged 20 years. "Sarah, it's Dad." I closed my eyes, holding the phone with a trembling hand. "Hi, Dad?" He was crying. I could hear it in his voice, the tears he was trying so hard to hold back. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to know how hard this is for me." "Okay. Is your offer real? The medical expenses? The financial help? Is it really real?" "It's real, Dad. And all we have to do is acknowledge that you're married to Marcus Wellington, that the twins are our grandchildren. That's all." There was a long pause, and then my father said something that broke my heart all over again. "We never should have doubted you. We never should have thrown you out. We were so wrong, Sarah. We were so incredibly wrong, and now your mother might die because of our stubbornness." "Dad." "No, let me finish. Please, I need to say this." He took a shaky breath. "You tried to tell us the truth, and we called you a liar. You needed our support when you were pregnant and scared, and we threw you out on the street. You've been living this incredible life, married to this incredible man, raising our grandchildren, and we've missed all of it because we were too proud to admit we were wrong." I was crying now, too, clutching the phone to my ear while Alexander babbled happily in his high chair and Victoria played with her toys on the floor. "We don't deserve your help," Dad continued. "We don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm asking anyway, because I can't lose your mother. I can't lose her knowing that we could have saved her if we'd just swallowed our pride." "The help was never conditional on you deserving it," I said quietly. "It was conditional on you finally telling the truth." "Then yes," he said. "Yes, we acknowledge that you are Sarah Wellington, wife of Marcus Wellington, and that Alexander and Victoria are our grandchildren. We will sign whatever papers your lawyers need, make whatever statements they require. We will tell anyone who will listen that we were wrong about you, that everything you said was true." "Okay," I whispered. "Okay. I'll have the lawyers contact you about the details." "Sarah?" Dad's voice was so small, so broken. "Is there any chance at all that someday you might be able to forgive us? That you might let us meet our grandchildren?" I looked across the room at my twins, almost 8 months old now, sitting up on their own and babbling in their own special language. They had my father's chin, my mother's stubborn cowlick, Emma's mischievous smile. They were Morrisons as much as they were Wellingtons. "Maybe," I said, "but it's going to take time, Dad, a lot of time." "I understand," he said. "And Sarah, I'm proud of you. I should have said it a year ago, but I'm proud of the woman you've become. I'm proud of the family you've built. And I'm sorry we weren't there to see it happen." After I hung up, I sat in my beautiful penthouse apartment, surrounded by everything I'd ever dreamed of, and cried for the girl who'd been thrown out of her home on a cold March night. She'd been so scared, so alone, so sure that her life was over. If only she could see me now. The public acknowledgement came in the form of a statement released to several major newspapers and posted on my father's LinkedIn profile. It was simple and direct. "We, David and Linda Morrison, wish to publicly acknowledge that our daughter Sarah Morrison is married to Marcus Wellington, CEO of Wellington Industries. We are proud grandparents to their twins, Alexander and Victoria Wellington. We deeply regret any confusion or misunderstanding regarding our daughter's relationship and marital status." It was hardly the groveling apology I might have fantasized about during those dark early days, but it was enough. It was the truth, finally spoken out loud for the world to hear. Within hours of the statement being published, my phone started ringing. Distant relatives who'd heard about the drama, college friends who'd seen the news, reporters who wanted the real story of how I'd met and married Marcus Wellington. But the call that mattered most came that evening, just as I was putting the twins to bed. "Sarah?" It was my mother's voice, weak but determined. "It's Mom." "Hi, Mom." I settled into the rocking chair in the nursery, watching Alexander and Victoria sleep peacefully in their cribs. "I wanted to call you myself," she said. "Not to ask for anything, not because your father made me. I wanted to call because I owe you an apology that's about a year overdue." I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten again. "You came to us when you needed us most," Mom continued, her voice getting stronger. "You tried to share the most important news of your life with us, and we treated you like you were mentally ill. We threw you out of your home when you were pregnant and scared, and we did it because we were too small-minded to believe that our daughter could be worthy of something extraordinary." "Mom!" "No, sweetheart, let me say this. I've been thinking about it every day since you left. Every single day. I would wake up wondering where you were sleeping, whether you were eating enough, whether you were safe. But I was too proud to pick up the phone. Too proud to admit that maybe, just maybe, we'd been wrong." She was crying now, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. The exhaustion of fighting cancer and facing bankruptcy and carrying the weight of her mistakes. "I missed your wedding," she whispered. "I missed my grandchildren being born. I missed their first steps and their first words and every precious moment of their lives so far because I was too stubborn to believe in my own daughter." "They haven't taken their first steps yet," I said softly. "Alexander's close, but Victoria's more interested in sitting and observing. She's going to be the careful one, I think." Mom laughed through her tears. "She sounds like you. You were always the cautious one, always thinking everything through." "Would you?" I took a deep breath, making a decision that surprised even me. "Would you like to meet them? When you're feeling better, after your treatment. Maybe you could come for a visit." The silence stretched so long, I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then Mom said, "You would really let us do that? After everything we did to you?" "They're your grandchildren," I said. "And despite everything that happened, you're still my mom." "Oh, Sarah," Mom was sobbing now. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I'll do better. I promise I'll be the grandmother they deserve, and the mother you should have had from the beginning." "We'll figure it out," I said. "One day at a time." After I hung up, I found Marcus standing in the doorway of the nursery, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "How much of that did you hear?" I asked. "Enough." He came over to the rocking chair and knelt beside it, taking my hands in his. "Are you okay? I know this can't be easy." "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me is happy that they finally believe me, that they want to be part of our lives, but another part of me is still angry, still hurt." "That's okay," Marcus said. "You're allowed to feel all of those things at once. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It just means choosing not to let it define your future." I looked at our children, sleeping peacefully in their expensive cribs in their perfectly designed nursery. Tomorrow, they would wake up in a world where their grandparents acknowledged their existence, where their mother was no longer the family embarrassment, but the family success story. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I walked out of my childhood home with nothing but 2 suitcases and a diamond necklace, but maybe it was better, because the girl who'd been thrown away had become a woman who couldn't be ignored. The daughter they'd called a liar had become someone whose truth could no longer be denied, and the twins sleeping in front of me? They would grow up knowing they were wanted, loved, and celebrated. They would never doubt their worth or question whether their family believed in them. That, I thought as I touched the necklace that still hung around my neck every day, was worth more than any apology. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's just proving that you were right all along. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, it's getting your family back too, not because they deserve it, but because you do.